We're gonna go ahead and get started. One of the panelists is just out refilling their coffee cup, and they'll be with us shortly. But welcome to this panel, the title of which is Film and Cultural Politics. And I'm sure that some of you are like, well, what exactly is that, and what's going to be the focus? And when the festival is put together, I'm often interested in sort of the themes and sort of threads that can hold some of the films together. And one of the things I was really excited about this year at the festival was by the time we leave here on Sunday, we will have talked about race, we will have talked about class, we will have talked about immigrants, we will have talked about women and their struggles in other countries. We will have talked about sexual orientation. We will have crossed, what is, tech people, we okay over there? All right, you're just messing with me, aren't you? Okay, all right. So we will have crossed a lot of different arenas by the time this is over with. And when I looked on the list and saw films like Do the Right Thing and Born on the 4th of July, it became clear that it was an opportunity for us to really talk about the role that film has in cultural and political debates. Sometimes that role is actively sought out by a filmmaker. Sometimes it happens quite by accident. You happen to make a film that slips into the public's consciousness at just the right time, and all of a sudden, your film becomes part of this bigger conversation. And I wanted to start with something that Roger wrote regarding Do the Right Thing. He wrote, I have been given only a few film-going experiences in my life equal to the first time I saw Do the Right Thing. Most movies remain up there on the screen. Only a few penetrate your soul. In May of 1989, I walked out of the screening at the Cannes Film Festival with tears in my eyes. Spike Lee had done an almost impossible thing. He'd made a film about race in which he had made a film about race in America that empathized with all participants. He didn't draw lines or take sides, but simply looked with sadness at one racial flashpoint that stood for many others. And then the next sentence is why we're here. Not everyone thought the film was that even-handed. So what we see is that film becomes this nexus in which we can have these really very important conversations about who we are as people. And what's really exciting about this year's festival is that through those conversations, hopefully by the end of this, we will know a lot more about ourselves, and we will know a lot more about the human conditions around us. So I'm very excited to share these folks with you. So I really would like to start by having the panelists introduce themselves, tell you sort of why they're here at the festival and what they do, and then we'll sort of jump into a conversation about the role that film plays in sort of political comment, social commentary. So, Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Aronson. I'm a founder of Fandor, a movie streaming company, where Roger and Chaz been great friends of the company, and we're a sponsor of the festival, and very happy to be here.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Davis. I'm an entertainment attorney out of Atlanta. I just love film, and I've been coming to the Roger Ebert Film Festival for, I guess now 4 or 5 years, but I just love the opportunity to get away and really get immersed in film. And I grew up in Chicago, so I grew up watching Roger Ebert and reading what he has to say about film. So I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Doc Erickson, a graduate of the university, film executive and producer, retired.
I'm Ann Hui. I'm from Hong Kong. I made this film, The Simple Life, which was invited last year, but I couldn't come. because I was shooting in the middle of shooting another movie. I'm so glad I was invited again and I can come this time.
And I'm Richard Laskowski. I taught film here for 30-some years. I've written reviews for the local newspaper, the News Gazette, and other sources for 35 years, I guess, and do other film writing. I'm retired now, so I have more time to see films and write about them.
Matt Zoller Seitz, the editor-in-chief of RogerEbert.com, website of reviews, feature articles, blog posts, videos, and all sorts of other wonderful stuff.
I'm Keith Stanfield. I'm not that important. All these people are cool. I'm an actor. I was in the film Short Term 12, which screened last night. And I'm just happy to talk about film and the arts, because I love those things.
My name is Haifa Mansour. I'm a Saudi filmmaker, and I made Wajda, the Saudi film that I hope that you'll get to see tomorrow afternoon, and really honored to be here. I come from a place that film does not exist. Cinema is illegal, so it's amazing just to come here and discuss film and art, and such an amazing place vibrant with students, and of course with an amazing atmosphere. Thanks.
Thank you. And my name is Eric Pearson. I teach film at the University of San Diego, and the festival has been gracious enough to invite me to participate in this process, and I'm always thankful for that. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois, so it's always good to come home as well. So I'd like to start out with a general question for you all, because one of the things, so we have actors, we have people who are responsible for curating content, we have filmmakers, we have critics, so we have a wide swath of people who are dealing with film and the way in which film engages the public. So what I'd like to do is start by asking you, where do you think film fits in to political and social conversations? One of the things I've learned about reading Roger's work is critics are not outside of the world. They run through the world and the film, so we are a part of that conversation from the very beginning. So I'm interested, for example, from a curation perspective, Fandor deals with films that are, shall we say, on the margin. So you occupy this really important space about these important conversations about folks who are outside the margins, and critics who bring that information to us. And I'd like Keith to speak about this enormous responsibility of getting it right. When you do wade into these social issues, the ability to sort of get it right. So I will start with Dan, and we'll work our way down, and whenever you feel like stepping in, please do that. Dan.
Sure. I think there's something very interesting about having films online, which is that you can now engender conversations of people who are interested in topics who can't just afford or be able to come to film festival. And I think it's very important to provide filmmakers access to the audiences, to provide audiences some ability to share issues. I think that one of the values that Fandor is trying to do is we're trying to help not just present the films for the viewers, but to give them forums to be able to make active decisions about them. And I think that's going to be crucially important going forward.
Matt, can you piggyback on that in terms of the work that on Roger's blog about how you go about linking films or categorizing them, or how that actually works in your environment?
In what sense? Do you mean as the categorizing films as they appear on the blog, or what do you mean?
For example, if I went to a review of Do the Right Thing, would there be other resources? Like, how broadly would that conversation be able to extend out from just the review? Is it just the review on the site, or is there links and things where that conversation gets extended?
They are, but they're not. The links are not structured in that way. They're generated automatically by an algorithm, but it's more an algorithm more along the lines of what you'd see at like a Netflix, where people who like this also like that. This review. If you like this review, here's another review that might be someone in the same ballpark. But a lot of it has to do more with readership, just sheer numbers of readership. But that's something that we want to look at. I will say that within the body copy of a review or a feature article, we're very careful about hypertext links and videos, and that we want to make sure to guide people towards other places, and particularly if it's a documentary or a film about some kind of political subject. If we quote from somebody, I always ask the writers to make sure that we link to the source if people want to read more, and also if we're citing the works of filmmakers or thinkers that have something to do with the subject being discussed, we want to make sure we're guiding them to that too.
Eric, can I add one more point? That we think that especially for films that people aren't as familiar with, providing a fair amount of context is crucially important. And so the contextual information include, as Matt said, links, video essays, etc. But it's giving people a reason to care.
Your film has really sparked a lot of conversations about the situation of women in the country. How has that affected you as a filmmaker, and did you know what you were getting into when you made this film?
Well, no, it was really hard for me to make the film because in Saudi, the film is not allowed. So it's kind of like people weren't used to financing the film was very difficult. And the mere fact of making a film, being a woman, is a political act. I try not to go political because I come from Saudi. You know, it's very hard to be political in a place like Saudi. And I try to be social more and try to still bring in more, like Iranian cinema, where you bring issues that are very political, but still you try to hide them and you try to bring them in a way that people can digest them because people are very conservative. So it is, for me, like to become a filmmaker coming from that place, I cannot help but be political even if I deny it. It's hard for me to make a film just like for, I want to entertain, and it's always for me, it's very important to have a story and to have a capturing protagonist that we want to love and we want to be with, but it is still, you have to push boundaries. You have to make, I feel the place needs it. The culture calls for it. When you go to a place like Saudi, people, even if they are conservative, but deep inside them, there is a deep longing to moving forward, moving away from only being like very conservative, a closed place. They want to be part of the bigger place. They resist it. And in Saudi, I'm a very polarizing figure. People hate me, people love me, and they fight over things like that, but I think it's very important for them to have this kind of consciousness. So, and when it comes to independent filmmaking, you have to be like that. It is, you cannot afford just being, exist away from them, from being a vision, bringing a vision that people want to see or argue with, or just like, you know, love or hate. It's very important, I feel, to be that conscious for people when you are making films in an independent world. And I really love your film. So it's amazing, and it's amazing to see 12 Years a Slave. Those films speak to us, and they're very political, but they are very, also makes us more noble only by watching them. So.
That's awesome. I couldn't imagine like what.
Oh, here.
Oh. Yeah, I think that's great. I think film is very powerful and reaches obviously a lot of people, and it makes a big difference. And I would see why something like that would be of notice around a lot of people. I think what you're doing is very courageous, and I appreciate it a lot.
Oh, thanks.
And I can't wait to see your film. How did you get to the position where you were like, I'm making a film. I know this is illegal. I know all these people don't want me to do this, but I'm making a film.
I wasn't trying to be illegal, and that is the other thing. It's very important for people to believe in what they were doing. I just wanted to have a hobby. I just wanted to be happy, and for me to say something, and just not. And that is when I feel like, honesty is very important. And sometimes you see some filmmakers trying to be someone else, and it is not, and because they want to fit in, they want to sell, and it's very important just to be who you are, I feel like it is. And I wasn't trying to be anything. I was just I made a short, and I never thought anybody will notice it. I just sent it to a small local competition, and it was accepted. And it went viral. It was on the digital era in Saudi, and it went viral. It talks about the woman covering in Saudi Arabia and how it is like, it's half of the population is anonymous. You don't know, and it is not only it is an issue of identity. It is really dangerous when you don't know that person. And it was about a serial killer who's disguised as a woman, and he goes killing and everything. And for me, it's amazing how people are afraid of that, of how women are dressed, and still they defend it very much passionately in Saudi. And the film went viral in Saudi Arabia. Every person saw it. It was only 7 minutes. And for me, I understood then how important film is, because we have a lot of drama, TV drama and stuff like that, but it never made people think and talk, because they are like Mexican drama, you know. It's more about entertaining, about extreme storylines. They don't touch people and issues that are important for them, that are passionate for them. And that is when I wanted to make films like that, just to make people rethink and reconsider, and yeah. So.
And you did, that's great. I mean, I think, like, people, they don't really want, sorry, I know we're just, like, going.
You guys just talk among yourselves.
No, just, I think people, like, through their daily lives, like, a lot of times they don't want to deal with reality and deal with, you know, what's actually occurring on the planet. And it's funny because films are able, you know, on artistic mediums are able to bring that to them, and those would be considered things that aren't real. But there's a lot more realism sometimes to be seen in those than even just everyday interaction, because there's so many, like, everyone's acting all the time.
Yes.
And even more so than sometimes you see in the movies. So it presents an opportunity for them to reflect and question everything. And that's what we were talking about last night, the short-term film thing, but I'll shut up now.
No, I wanted to ask you, when you took the role in the film, did you feel some sort of different kind of pressure as an actor to get it right, so to speak, because you would now be part of this conversation about youth, illness, and that sort of thing?
Well, I hoped that I understood it the way in which it was given to me, so that way I did it right in that sense. But I mean, as far as performing it, that's cool. As far as performing it, I just performed it honestly, and I think that you can't really go wrong with that. Just being honest and throwing it out there. You know, whatever you do with what is the reality is up to your individual perception, I imagine.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to ask you about your film is this sort of beautiful conversation about aging with dignity and that kind of thing. And I was wondering, how has your film filtered into that conversation about sort of the aging process and people having control of that?
Seems to have a good effect on society, because people start to think that it's a legitimate topic for discussion, and they all go home to their mothers. I mean, after watching the movie, and I'm very pleased about it.
Okay. Those who write criticism, when you find a film that seems to be injecting itself into a political conversation, how do you approach writing about it? I can at Matt and Richard.
Well, let's see. I try to be as objective as possible when I'm doing a review of that sort, and try to point out sort of where the film's argument might be going, without actually taking a stand myself. To leave the option open there for the viewer to form his or her own opinions and engage in his or her own dialogue about it without having too much of my opinion about the particular political issue being involved. The artistic merits of the film, that's one thing, but the filmmaker is making his or her argument. I don't have to make that argument for the filmmaker. I shouldn't have to.
What happens if you can you do that? I mean, can you sort of stand outside yourself and say, I don't have an opinion whether Mookie does the right thing at the end of Do the Right Thing or not? Can you write a review where you don't have to sort of expose yourself just a little bit?
Exposing myself. Let's see. Well, I try. As I said, I don't think that's my job to further the argument of the filmmaker. That's the filmmaker's job. And if there's something that that doesn't work in terms of the development of the film, or that works particularly well, then that's worth commenting on. Personally, maybe that's a defect. I try to stay away from the actual argument itself. I don't want to argue against the filmmaker, certainly, or for him or her. The film's out there. It should speak for itself in that regard, in terms of what the message is.
Okay. Matt.
I kind of tend to take the opposite approach, and it's caused issues for me at various places I've worked. And I'll give you one example, which is I wrote for the Newark Star-Ledger, the largest daily in New Jersey, for 11 years, and I was a pop culture columnist and a television critic there at the same time that I was a film critic in New York. And I've always tried to take my cues from people like Roger and Pauline Kael and James Agee and people who did write about the political content of movies. And it wasn't like they turned every single review into a political screed, because that would be boring. But they didn't shy away from it. And when I first started at the paper in 1996, Bill Clinton was the president, and I wrote a lot of columns about television news. That was one of the things that they wanted me to do. And I was very critical of Clinton at a lot of points during his presidency, and they never said a word to me about that. And then Bush got elected, and all of a sudden I was told, can you please try to keep politics out of your television news columns? And I argued with them about it, and it's funny because you tell this story about being a filmmaker. I experienced as a daily journalist. What I had to do was find ways to say what I actually thought about Bush without saying what I thought about Bush. And that's a tricky balancing act, and it does depend on who your audience is, but I've never believed that one should keep one's political opinions to oneself in a film review, because that just seems silly to me. Why keep politics to yourself when you're telling everybody your opinion of what is the proper aesthetic for a film, or whether or not a movie achieves the artistic goals that it's setting out to achieve? And I don't know if this is a sidebar or anything, or if we even want to get into it, but aesthetics is important. And what we put in the frame and what we leave out of the frame, and how we photograph people, what stories we tell, what parts of the story we leave out, everything you do as a storyteller is a political act, and I think it's all fair game. And I wrote a piece for RogerEbert.com not too long ago, just begging my colleagues to please write about the movie making. Not just about the story, not just about the characters and the themes, but how does the movie tell its story visually, which was something Roger was so good at doing. And I was trying to stress, I'm not saying guess what kind of lens the director used in a shot. I'm saying look at a movie like 12 Years a Slave, where there's a marvelous shot that shows the hero, he's imprisoned, and you're looking at him through a jail cell, and the camera cranes up above the rooftop of the jail, and you see the Capitol dome in the background, and it's unfinished. That's a shot that tells a story. It's a shot that makes a political statement about American history. And it's not just about what happens in the story. And I got into a lot of arguments about this with my fellow critics. And one of the answers I gave was, when I sometimes teach college classes, when I argued that you should write about the pictures, you should write about the sounds, don't make it a book report. The example I give is, do you remember when O.J. was arrested and Time and Newsweek had two covers? And the Newsweek cover was just the mugshot. And the Time magazine cover, you're laughing already, they darkened him. they darkened them on the cover of Time. So anybody who went into a supermarket saw Time and Newsweek, and here was just the plain mugshot, and here was Time magazine like it was Birth of a Nation or something. And I said, like, anybody who thinks that aesthetics can't make a political, just by painting a picture in a particular way, you're not making a political statement. All you got to do is look at these two covers to see how wrong you are.
So I wanted to bring Doc and Michelle into this conversation because as someone who's advising folks about the beginning of the filmmaking process, do you have a lot of conversations about the possible political ramifications of the work that people are choosing to do?
I wouldn't say a lot of conversation. I mean, you know, particularly in my role, I try to stay as focused on the legal aspects as I can. But, you know, I bring my own biases to, you know, what they bring to me. And so I may get a little uncomfortable, and I have to then check myself in terms of I can't predict what's going to happen, you know. And so I try not to, I go with what I like and what I feel has a message or has something that resonates with me. And so I look at that even from a business aspect. You know, and the thing about it is that even if it's a film that's meant to be completely entertaining, if you will, you really can't predict how other folks are going to see every character. And so when I think about even Short Term 12, I mean, I saw Short Term 12 at South by Southwest, which I just fell in love with the film even then. And looking at it last night, and I looked at, you know, Keith's character, for example, and you know, you listen to the rap lyrics and you're like, oh man, you know, how are folks taking those lyrics? But it's a character, and there's going to be biases and thoughts behind regardless. And so you just have to learn how to take yourself out of the picture, at least from my perspective. I try to take myself out of it and not look so closely and overthink it. The filmmaker is the filmmaker, and whatever voice they have and their message or whatever it is they're trying to get out there, then, you know, my job is really just to help them from the legal and business aspects of it to do it the right way. And if I think there's going to be some kind of backlash, sure, I'll talk about that and bring those up and say, how do you feel about it? And, you know, is that a road you want to go down? But again, you don't really know what's going to happen in the big picture, so.
Doc, you've been making film for a while, so I'm curious as to has there been moments? I mean, do you think that filmmakers get more intentional in terms of entering, or has it, you know, people stayed away from it and now they're more willing to do it?
We could debate this for a long time, but I think that what occurs to me earlier days when I was in the film business, it was very dangerous to do a thought-provoking film. You know, you just didn't do it if you wanted to make money. So ultimately, of course, television changed a lot of that. And you can argue whether films, how far films go in bringing society along, or where society steps in and brings films along to some point where we don't mind making dangerous subjects and so forth. And it's very interesting to see how it develops, if you're around long enough to see it develop.
Okay, thank you. On the heels of yesterday's decision regarding net neutrality, I really would like to ask the panel, what is the role of the internet in terms of film and cultural and political debates? And I just, you know, we you know what, we'll start at the end, because you were talking about how, you know, things went viral and it made a difference. So I'm curious as to how you saw the role of the internet influence conversation around your film.
Well, we don't have cinemas. We don't have cinema theaters. So a lot of Saudis saw the film pirated, and it's important for people. It's really bad. Piracy is the worst thing ever in the world. But in a place like Saudi, where everything is controlled, it's important for kids to find this kind of information. Like, they found film that speaks to them, and they put films online, and they go and it's kind of created this kind of democracy. virtual democracy where a lot of they can access things and they can put things online, and it changed a lot of things. And all of a sudden, young people in Saudi, and Saudi is very tribal, so when you are older, you have all the power in the world. If you're young, you're not heard nothing. So all of a sudden, the power shifted because the kids now, they control Twitter, they control Facebook, and they go on and they put like one episode of something they've done in the mall, and then all the newspapers are very reactive and following up. So it's created this kind of, they gave the young people huge power and weight in society, and it influenced, and I think it will influence the way Saudi Arabia as a country moving ahead, because now they make sure that young people have employment, they are not marginalized, and they are not going to create like they're not going to be a disturbative power, that they try to challenge it by giving them more chances. And so I think internet really opened up a lot of options for young people and women also. So.
Can I just say I wish Jim Cohen were here, because he made a statement on a panel yesterday that I thought was really important. And he talked about net neutrality, and he essentially described net neutrality as the most important issue facing artists pretty much of all kinds. Because what it means, and he broke it down in almost Roger-like simplicity, there's a fast lane and a slow lane. And the fast lane is for people who can afford the fast lane, and that means that the big entertainment conglomerates, and really any kind of conglomerate, is going to have control of the fast lane because they can afford it. And everybody else is going to be in the slow lane. And what that means in practical terms is you have to think about, what do we know about human nature in the age of the internet? And what we know about human nature is you click on a video, and if it takes more than 5 seconds to load, you're gone.
It's true.
This is the most effective silencing of artists, political thinkers, everybody that you can possibly imagine right now. I mean, we have not even begun to understand how important this issue is, but we will.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time with the internet. I feel like the internet is kind of like a sort of physical projection of consciousness itself, in the way in which we communicate with each other. And in some ways it's cool because it's not filtered necessarily by a sort of these your perception of what it is will be explained because you're anonymous. Like, you just say however you feel about it. It's not like filtered by any sort of fear of persecution necessarily. People get on there and say whatever. I mean, regardless of whether they even feel it or not. Like, sometimes get people, but you hear from every avenue what people are perceiving. So I guess this probably changes the way in which people approach it. And then you have so much information, like, just coming at once. It's like, I don't know, it's fucking crazy. I love the internet. I think it's exciting. I mean, but in another way, it's actually really scary too. You know, like, you can go on the internet and see anything. Like, you know, there would be a point where there's nothing that people haven't seen. So, you know, how do you continue to find creative ways amongst all this information and all this stuff to bring something to the forefront? Very interesting. I don't know. I just hope I'm a part of it all.
Richard, did you want to weigh in on the internet question before I?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously an important source of information, and it offers, you know, a lot of people chances to see films that they're not going to see in in other venues unless they're, you know, they can get to an Ebertfest or something equivalent. So yeah, I mean, it's becoming an ever more important and vital part of our everyday lives. It's it's changing popular culture, at least. So, yeah.
Ann, can you speak a little bit about the role of the internet in your film finding an audience?
See, I didn't go on the internet until very recently. Okay. And when I was working in China the last year, I found that the two most important, what do you call it, film comms, they're very, very impressive because it's sort of exhaustive and encyclopedic about either Chinese and Western filmmakers, and they got the latest information, and they give all of them marks. I mean, by common vote. Whoever wants to vote will vote, and they get a mark for their whole careers, and they get a mark for each of their new films.
Okay.
And it's voted by people who are volunteers. And some of them wrote short critiques and some long. And when I read them, they were so good, you know. They're not by famous critics, and they're not known. And I felt, I've sort of started, you know, watching, trying to read them, and then I find that lots of the films, I mean, people start watching films, a lot of films, and then they're just comparing Western films with Chinese films, and it becomes a kind of common parameter. And that improves the standard of the local films. And this democratization seems to be very interesting and exciting, I feel. But of course, it becomes another kind of fascism. Like they say that on Duban.com, if you get a 7 or 9, then you are a good filmmaker. Right. If you get lower than that, you're not, and you start judging yourself by their standards. Mm-hmm. And everybody takes up that standard. But I think it's anyway, it's not by authority, but by common vote. And they write very good. And I feel something is happening. For one thing, lots and lots more people are watching movies and talking about them and trying to be intelligent and trying to find new ways of talking about them. But of course, the bad thing is that when I was teaching last month at the Beijing Film Academy, I find something which is very, very, how do you call it? It's dangerous. Because all these students, or the young people, they watch film, they download films and watch them on the computer. Yeah. And if a film has got a very good pictorial quality or sound quality, they never get it, and they judge the film by the quality on the internet. Right. I mean, sometimes even I forget it, because, and then suddenly I saw parts of my films downloaded and was shown. And I felt it was so bad, because I knew what it's like. Then I knew the difference between the original film and, I mean, this habit of judging a film, you know, from the computer is something which is sort of not self-conscious, but very insidious, I feel. And you're losing what a film can be for you.
And it can get parodied and then made into a song and made into a remix. And that's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, part of this democratization and streaming and that kind of thing does. So the good news is that everyone has access to a lot more films. The bad news is that in what format are they watching those films, and how can we, as people who are interested in this, let students know, or people who have embraced this, that you know, get out to the movie theater and stress this communal experience. One of the things I love about this festival is that there is this communal experience, and it just reminds you that film was always meant to be a communal experience. And Roger emphasized that, because when a student says, I watched Lawrence of Arabia on my laptop, I'm just like, I'm going to cry now.
Then you didn't watch Lawrence of Arabia.
I feel like it'll make the theater stronger, you know, over time. Because everybody's going to be like, just uploading movies into their veins and stuff. And, like, all the people who want like the real cool experience will just be like, I'm going to the theater. And then everybody will be like, well, you're cool. And no one does that.
I thought about that during the screening. I'm bringing up Jim Cohen's film again, Museum Hours, which played yesterday. I hope some of you in here got to see it. It's extraordinary, and one of the things that's extraordinary about it is it's a lot of it is set in a museum. It's a movie that it doesn't have a straight linear plot. It's not like there's a new incident every 5 minutes that's driving the plot towards some incredible climax. It's more like a My Dinner with Andre in a museum, as Kevin Lee put it, and sometimes they travel outside of it. But there's no score, and as you know, when you visit a museum, it's quiet there. And there's something about sitting in that theater, this like 1,100 seat theater, And there are scenes where people are staring at paintings, and you're hearing the sounds that you hear when you're in a museum, which is the sound of people's feet shuffling a little bit. Or maybe somebody opens a candy wrapper and they're like, whoops, you know, or you hear the docent giving a lecture or something. And the silence and the willingness to live in silence and to think and to not be checking your phone and to be reminded that you're, you know, yeah, I got to go on Facebook and remind myself that I'm alive, you know, like that. I mean, we all do it, right? But you don't have that experience when you see a movie in the theater. And if you see a movie like Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which is, I will say, a very good example of that kind of movie, they don't have any moments like that. They don't have any moments where you're just looking at someone silently thinking, and there's no dialogue. And only in a communal experience can you really understand how important that is. And I feel like it clears the mind. It clears it out, clears out all the cobwebs and the dirt.
Dan, I wanted to hear from you on the internet issue.
Sure. So for those who don't know, what Eric commented on and Jim said yesterday, and then Matt referred to, is that on May 15th, the chairman of the FCC is looks like they're going to propose some rules that will allow for fast lanes and slow lanes on the internet. And really, what that means is, if it happens, that these conversations that happen on the margins, they don't have the money. It's the people who have the money. It's going to become an extortion racket. The people who have the money will have the voice. So we're about to, if we're not informed about the opinions, if we're not informed, if we don't help make things happen, if we don't help comment, we're going to lose the democratization that we have. So it's important for all of us to be talking about this daily, and for all of you to tell everyone to talk about this daily. It is right. We have this incredible opportunity now where everyone can get their film out, but just like 100 years ago when United Artists was formed, because there were gatekeepers, they're gatekeepers now, and they're getting stronger and stronger.
Michelle, do you want to?
The only other thing I was going to add on that is when it comes, the way I've seen kind of the social media and independent film and kind of somewhat making it easier for independent filmmakers to get the word out about their films, or I should say even filmmakers that are not as well known, if you will, but those who have a good handle on the Instagram and the Twitter and Facebook and all the ways that social media connect, they've been able to drive an audience to their projects, whether that's with let's say Christian films, or whether that's with minority filmmakers. I've seen effective use of social media to be able to drive folks, an audience, to their film, and then still get them in the theaters to see the film. So I think with the whole fast lane, slow lane, that may also impact that as well. So
It already has on Facebook,
Yeah.
to some degree. And you may have read a little bit about this, but it's like every business proposition, it seems like there's always the same thing which happens, which is, here's the ideal, and then once they've sucked you in, it's like, and here's the reality. And that's kind of what's happening on Facebook. I don't know if you know about this, but if you have a page, if you just started a page, for your film or your book or whatever, it used to be that everybody in your feed could basically see it.
right.
But now it's been cut down. It's, you know what I'm talking about? It's like, I'm not explaining it properly. Maybe Dan can kind of weigh in on
Yeah,
it.
and I think now you see more of the paid kind of
You do.
advertisement, and it's not overtly this paid advertisement, but it shows up in your feed. And if you are a business and you go out to, then provide that in someone else's feed, then it's going to cost you money to do that.
Right.
And,
It's like
and
the
that's money
megaphone.
that, independent filmmakers necessarily
don't they
don't
have
have.
Well, absolutely. As it becomes, as Facebook has become a public company and is trying to figure out, how do you make the short-term, money, then what happens is they're trying to figure out how to monetize it. And so one way they monetize it now is you can actually pay more for your film to show, for your page to show up in more feeds.
Absolutely.
There's this fascinating thing about Facebook. You can send messages on Facebook, and if you're not a friend of someone who you send a message to, it goes into some other box. And actually,
Which a lot of people don't know exists.
it turns out if you pay $1 with the message, it doesn't go in the other box.
Don't they have
Pay
like,
to get on the highway.
I saw on the internet that they have like these click farms. And if you like pay for advertisement, they just have people like just clicking all day,
Yep.
just liking pages, but no one's really actually seeing it because it's just people just like liking it, something like
So-
that. It's not real though.
So Eric, if I may, that's again why the world is changing. It's really important for us to be informed.
Right, to be participating in the conversation.
Correct.
So here's what I'd like to do now. I'm going to leave you all with a question to think about that I'm going to get back to you on the end. And if you have a question for our panel, if you would approach the mic there in the center, we're going to open it up for Q&A. But I'll give them this question so they can think about it while the Q&A is going on. I would like you to share a film that asked you or forced you to challenge your own belief system in some sort of way. So you can think about that while people are approaching the mic, and we'll close with that. But sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the panel. I have a question, I guess it's simplistic, but maybe it isn't. I can't think of a film that doesn't have a political statement or a cultural statement or environment, whatever you want to call it, including animation, including cartoons, including, the shoot 'em ups, whatever you want. Implied within it seems to be some sort of message, either what they included or not included, not talking about the quality of the story and how well they tell it, but there is a message there that can be interpreted as influencing society or reflecting on society. And I'm wondering if anybody can think of a film that doesn't fit that category.
Yeah, I don't think there's any film that doesn't fit that category. I think it's always a question of degree, and in some ways it's a question of subtlety. It's a question of how long the film stays with you after you've seen it, because sometimes the message might be there and you don't get it. Sometime years down the road, you'll actually have an interaction. You're like, you know what? That reminds me of a film I saw some time ago, which is I think the magic and the power of film is that once it's in there, it's in there. And the ways in which we access it as our life goes forward will change based on the circumstances that we happen to find ourselves in at that given moment. So, you're all right. There's always something embedded in there. It's just a question of how we access it. And sometimes what's great is how it changes over time. You go back and you look at a film that was made 30 or 40 years ago, and you're like, I didn't see that quite then. And the last thing is sometimes it's there in its absence. I mean, the fact that during the whole entire Vietnam era, we made one film about the war, which was The Green Berets. All the films that help us examine Vietnam come after the war is over with. That in and of itself is worth our paying attention to and saying, it wasn't what we saw during the Vietnam War, maybe it was what we didn't see as well.
And yet, there were a ton of Vietnam films, they just weren't about the Vietnam War.
just weren't about the
Every
Vietnam War.
freaking Western that came out between 1964 and 1975 was about Vietnam.
Right.
The Outlaw Josie Wales, A Little Big Man, The Wild Bunch. In fact, I think Roger might have alluded to that in his review of The Wild Bunch, that the extreme violence that was in that movie was a response to what we were seeing in the news.
And that's why we need critics to sort of make sure that we get that, because a lot of us won't at that time when we're having that experience. So, yes, sir.
I'd like to switch the discussion over. First of all, Ms. Way, I wanted to tell you I love your film, A Woman of 40. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's great. And I wish it were more widely available. That's what I want to address in my question is the issue of availability. There are a lot of problems where films from other countries are not released in the United States. Worse yet, they're remade in subpar remakes. And even more insidious lately, we have the Weinstein brothers again making their own versions of international films like The Grandmaster and Snowpiercer, things that were happening in the 90s with things like Baghdad Cafe and Priest. So Americans are not getting the chance to see films either because they're not distributed, because the money goes into really crappy remakes, or because somebody is re-editing them and telling us that this is the real thing. What do you think about this?
I'll take a shot. So Fandor tries to work with distributors and filmmakers of a lot of these films, and one of the things about streaming is that you need to negotiate licensing agreements with these filmmakers, and the model of Fandor is basically a revenue share model, and so a lot of these filmmakers and distributors are trying to maximize the revenue that they get from various places. And if we say, hey, we're trying to grow an audience, this is how our business works, they said, well, maybe someone else will give us more money, and so we're not really that interested in talking to you. And so it's a really interesting challenge that because of how the licensing world works, that you got to figure out how to. It's a chicken and egg problem. I mean, in some ways, they're waiting for us to have a big enough audience, be able to pay enough out of the revenue stream, and it's the films that get the audience. So it's really, we all need to work together to solve this problem.
Well, I've done only one film and traveled around Europe and came to America, but I have to say that there is a market for foreign film in the States, and we've done really well in America. It is small, but art house films, foreign films are small everywhere. Like even in Europe, in France, for example, it's an amazing place. It's heaven for every foreign filmmaker. But it's smaller. You cannot compare it to the mainstream. But I think there is a dedicated audience here. There's for foreign film, and a lot of people write me from the States about the film, and it's such a small Saudi film, it's hard to be noticed, and I feel there is bigger than what you think coming from the U.S. If you're coming from outside, you'd see how it's a very effective group. Yeah.
Do you ever think of remaking it for different audiences?
Remake? No, I don't think. It's hard to recreate, but.
And I think a lot of it is too. I mean, we're at this great institution, which really helped me understand and appreciate film. And I think that more colleges can do more to so that when you ask a student to see a film where the characters don't speak English, they're like, oh, will there be reading? Yes, there will be reading, right? But I also think that my appreciation of that came when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, seeing my first Fellini film and sort of understanding and being surrounded by people on the university campus that helped me to develop that. So maybe we just have to do more work in terms of creating the next generation of people who watch films to say that, not every great film do people speak English.
Well, that's one of the things that we're trying to do at RogerEbert.com, and I've had a number of discussions with film professors and other critics about how to do this, is getting young people to move outside of their comfort zone. And it's easy to forget that young people do in fact have comfort zones just like everybody else does. And the comfort zone in film criticism and film coverage on the internet, everybody knows what it is. Many of the major film sites are concentrating on what I call the usual suspects: superhero movies, horror films, action films, movies with robots, movies with monsters, and so forth. And when they get into art cinema, I'm sorry, I just have to say this. When they get into art cinema, it's Quentin Tarantino, the Coen brothers, Nicholas Winding Refn, and what I call arty man cave movies. Like they're movies, they look and sound great on your man cave TV, but you're never going to see a movie like Museum Hours reviewed on a site that's going to do 25 articles on the new Tarantino film. And I love Tarantino, but we've got to find a way as critics, as film enthusiasts, to get people to be excited about the things that are not familiar. And I'm reading these memoirs by Stefan Zweig about his experience in Vienna towards the beginning of the last century, and he talks about cafe society and what it meant, and how all of these young artists would be meeting in these cafes and talking about who they were reading, and it was all about literature. And they would talk about a poet, and they would argue about this major poet versus this minor poet, and somebody would invariably chime in and say, yeah, well, there's this other poet from that I just read who just published a volume in Paris, and he's the greatest poet in Europe. And everybody would go, oh. I got to check that out. And, you know, we need more of that in film coverage. And I think that's going to help documentaries, it's going to help independent films, and I think ultimately it's going to help mainstream commercial cinema too.
I have to say, I completely second your comments about the younger generation. I'm a film instructor in the Chicago suburbs for high school, and high school students are hungry for film literacy. They are hungry to understand ways to access film and to see things differently and to see different things. So I really appreciate that point. My comments are directed to Doc Erickson. If I could, you made a comment that there are some times where film brings society along and sometimes where society brings film along. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit and just explain what you mean by that. It's a great statement. I love it.
Well, I don't think it's easy to elaborate, but it's a general statement, and it happens over a period of time. It's not something that you can pinpoint and say, well, that's what did it, you know. But little by little, it happens. Then you look back upon it, and you say, this is where it started. This particular film said something that got people thinking more, and then progressing along that line. So society's a big thing to move, and so is film, for that matter, vice versa. But anyhow, I'm sorry I can't give you some specific examples, but.
I think kind of like
You'll recall them yourself.
I was going to ask you if you could think of any movies where they came out and essentially the audience was way ahead of it. You know, like where they're looking at it and go like, yeah, this is not shocking or new to us. We're already, we've been there for a while.
I'd have to think for a second about that.
Maybe somebody else on the
think
panel
I'm
can.
prepared
Twilight.
for that. I'm sorry I brought it up.
And then they're like really thought-provoking.
Maybe.
Huh.
Or Social Network.
Hi. I don't know how many of you have been following what Jeff Skoll has been doing with Participant Productions, getting back to politics and film. But yeah, they've been making a point of producing overtly political films, and then they have a website called Take Part, and they encourage people at the end of every film to take part and engage in the conversation. There's more information available and stuff. I mean, I've been following it just because I actually went to school with Jeff Skoll. He was probably the least likely person to turn out to be a billionaire philanthropist ever. But I was wondering what you thought of that and that idea of that sort of overt politicization of film, and whether you think it helps the cause or hurts it, or, you know, your thoughts.
It's great. You know, people looking for a way to connect, people looking for a way to do something, giving them tools. I mean, that, you know, this is what the internet's great for.
The great thing about one of the great things about seeing a movie with an audience is that everybody wants to be on the same page, and there's not, you don't have that incentive to skip ahead to figure, you know, just give me the gist, too long, didn't read. You know, you don't get that when you're seeing a movie with an audience, and especially if there's a discussion afterwards, because you don't want to be the person who missed it. You know, like who doesn't like, what are you talking about? Which senator? Like the one in the scene when you were napping. You know?
I have two comments. One on the net neutrality. It's really a lot bigger than the fast lane, slow lane issue. I mean, Netflix has already announced they're raising the rates for new subscribers to make up for what they're going to get charged. So we're going to get charged. If Amazon, everybody, we're going to get charged. It's the same way I get charged now. If I want faster internet at home, I want to pay for the higher rate, then I can get better streaming to my TV, to my computer, and whatever. So we really need to address it as a global picture when we send in our comments, not focus on the one thing, because they'll grab that and then ignore everything else. My other comment on foreign films is, I'm leading a course on the story of film right now. And obviously we're dealing with a lot of foreign films. And the people in my class are going, oh, wow. But do you think the reason that we don't see foreign films here as much as Europeans and other countries see American films is we're too prejudiced in this country against looking at foreign films, particularly since 9/11?
I don't know that it's 9/11. I think it's subtitles and trying to figure out foreign cultures. I mean, even if there's not that much difference from ours, it's still an adjustment that you have to make. And like it or not, most people go to the multiplexes for entertainment and not to be challenged for the most part.
It wasn't 9/11, it was 1927, which is when the jazz singer came out, and suddenly people became aware of the fact that movies were unique products of a particular country and culture, and people had to start worrying about dubbing and subtitles and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think world commercial cinema ever fully recovered from that blow.
Also, American films are very good. They're very well made. Like, it's hard for foreign films to compete with some of American films because they're superb. They're really good, and people are used to a certain standard. And some of the foreign films, because I watch a lot of foreign films, are very, like you described them, very slow. Hardly anything happens, and it's hard to capture people sometimes with some foreign films that very much about a certain culture. It's not accessible. So I think that is another thing. But from my experience as a foreign film, I find the American audience are very receptive, very warm, they invest when they watch a film. When the distributor takes the time to bring the film to the audiences are very, very warm, and they welcome, and there is a curiosity. And I enjoyed my tour in the United States. I really enjoyed everywhere where I showed my film. It's such an amazing audience. So,
America.
Yes.
Actually, like, in my experience, I've liked foreign films sometimes a lot better than American. Oh, shit, sorry. Yeah, in my experience, I've actually liked foreign films a little bit more than American films as far as what I take away from it, like, artistically, I guess. Like, more, they appeal to me more emotionally, I think, a lot of the time. I think, by and large, American film is just more like, let me give you some mental masturbation for a little while, and just to get you along through the day. We're more, concerned about being entertained than actually taking anything away from it. It's just a racket, It's become kind of ridiculous. It's still great, but I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
foreign films are more like appealing to different things.
It might actually help us too, as people who talk about film, is if we sort of change some of our language, because we seem to use entertaining and challenging as sort of opposites when we talk about film. That they're sort of like, well, people want to be entertained, they don't want to be challenged. And I think that maybe we can help the conversation ourselves if we stop creating that dichotomy and sort of saying that they're not actually the same, that you can be challenged and entertained. It doesn't have to be an either or. Now, it's hard when you look at a big hardware film where lots of stuff gets blown up and you're like, where's the challenge there? But I do think that maybe it would help us if we just language-wise, we made that shift and started thinking about the value of the individual film and not whether it parses out into one side or the other. So,
Yeah,
sir.
that's true.
Yes. Hi. I got home last night after the Ebertfest, went into my library, sat in my easy chair, and looked at my collection of books on film. Books from thinkers like Roland Barthes, Christian Metz, Bill Nichols, Laura Mulvey, Bazin, even back issues of Jump Cut. Who are today's deep thinkers of film, and do you agree with me that why are they noticeably absent from festivals like this?
They're very hard to understand.
Well-
I did film studies. It was the hardest thing to understand them. Those, yes, film philosophy is really hard sometimes. It goes to Deleuze and the gas image, and I don't know. I think they take film way far than what it's.
I would say we've got David Bordwell here. Not too shabby.
Okay.
Yes.
I can answer that question. When we started the film festivals, Roger made a conscious decision that he didn't want it to be only about esoteric philosophy. He wanted it to be about films that, and not having a dichotomy between what's entertaining and what's informative, because those things, like you say, they're not mutually exclusive. But he did not want it to be a language that you had to be a graduate student in film to understand. That was a very conscious decision. And we do have good thinkers about film here, including the people on this panel, and David Bordwell and other people that we bring in, but we specifically said, that's not what this film festival will be.
I see. Thank you.
Michael, I'll give you the last question, and I'll come back to the question I posed to the panel, and we'll wrap it up.
It's not more of a question, it's more of a reply to the gentleman who was asking a question about prejudice about 9/11, and does that affect how foreign films are being seen in the US? Because Omer and I were talking last night, and I was comparing Australian cinema, the Australian industry, film industry, and Australia is completely isolated from everything. But the film industry over there is very open to Asian cinema, to European cinema, because it is influenced from British. So I was wondering about that, and I was wondering if it's because, is it a prejudiced society? I don't think it's because of, when I thought about it, I don't think it's because of prejudice, because in the last few years you have some foreign-based films winning best film, like Slumdog Millionaire, not necessarily from India, but still a foreign film when you think about it. And the artist, so I think it's more of the machine, the industry that's controlling American films, how they're distributed, who decides what Americans get to see. Not like in Australia, it's not the same, it's just not the same. There's a different sensibility. So in America, I just think that the machine, for lack of a better word, controls what's being seen. And American audiences are receptive as long as they're given the chance that they get to see it. I just wanted to add.
I agree. I'd say, like most things, follow the money. See who's making the most money. In Australia, because there's less films being made, there's more money from outside. Here the money's not interested in letting in outsiders.
So my question was, I asked you to think of a film that sort of challenged you politically or socially, and would you share that with us?
I love a film called Rosetta by the Dardenne brothers. It's about this girl and inspired me, inspired Wajda a little, because it's about this young girl who's trying to raise above her surroundings. It's a very art house film. You would love that. The camera follows the girl, and it's very intense and all that. And for me, it challenged me, because I come from a place there is no training in film. It was really hard for me to see a film like this. It is, as a filmmaker, I love this film. I love what it injected into the audience and how it affected me. And it was the challenges, like, how could I make a film like this? How possibly on earth? I can't answer that. But it is like films like this that are done with a lot of heart and with a lot of art, with a lot of dedication, that makes us wonder about our place and how we can, as even filmmakers, come close. So Rosetta by the Dardenne brothers.
Thank you.
I didn't hear the name of the film.
Rosetta by the Dardenne brothers.
Okay.
It's a Belgian-French film.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Keith.
Yeah, I like this French film too. I can't recall the dude's name, but the movie's called Black Moon, and it came out in '75, and it's sort of like I don't know, you'd have to watch it, but it just really revamped the way I viewed filmmaking. There wasn't a central plot or anything. There was just sort of these things going on. You had to put it together in your own head as to what actually was occurring. And I left it feeling like I just went into a dream. And I never really felt like that before. Thought that was pretty awesome. So, it wasn't political or anything. I also Malcolm X by Spike Lee. That was awesome. For me, that was the first time I saw someone who I actually like really look up to, their story being chronicled in that way, and actually showing that he was a real human being that was flawed as well. And you know, that was a political awesome time for me. And then Black Moon was just like, how do you make a film like this? This is crazy.
I think my earliest political awakening at a movie was during Top Gun, which I saw when it came out, and I went to see it with my best friend, and we were both into action movies, and we knew that there were planes, and Tom Cruise was in it, so it would probably be a good night at the movies. And I tell you, that was the first time I was 17, 18 years old, that I thought maybe I wanted to live somewhere besides the United States. Because the reaction to that movie, I grew up, you know, in the post-Vietnam era. I was obsessed with Vietnam. I was like reading books about Vietnam when I was a, you know, middle schooler, because I had family members who were in the war. And I was watching this movie, and I remember I at one point had this thought that we've learned nothing. We've learned nothing from Vietnam. And I don't know why that thought entered my head. It was probably because of the way people were cheering as Tom Cruise and his buddies were blowing these faceless pilots out of the sky. Middle Eastern pilots. They never tell you what country they're from. And so that was it for me, probably. That you know, this was entertainment. It's funny you say, you know, the difference between challenging and entertaining. Movies can do both. But some movies entertain and pander. And I think that was the first one I saw that I felt did that. Richard.
Well, it's hard to make a choice, but I guess I'd have to say the one that made me most uncomfortable was Birth of a Nation. Especially trying to teach that and to, you know, navigate amongst the, you know, the historical importance, the aesthetics, the innovations, and the just sort of jaw-dropping depictions of race.
Thank you. Anne.
Actually, I have two.
Okay.
The first one is Triumph of the Will. I still can't get over it. Such magnificent film, but for such a cost. And it always sort of boggles my mind. I don't know how to take it. That's one thing. And the second thing is, the second film is Kurosawa's last film, second last film. It's, I forgot the English name. It's called something like Rhapsody in August.
Yes.
Yeah. With Richard Gere coming to apologize for dropping the atom bomb. I was so angry with the film and so disappointed with Kurosawa that I walked out in the middle. Because the whole ideology of the film is a mess for me.
A heavy-handed one, I guess, but The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit sort of set me thinking pretty much along those lines. I realized what sort of biases that I carried with me that I shouldn't. And so I don't remember the film exactly, but I do remember the
How
title.
it made you feel. Yeah.
This was a difficult question for me, actually. When I think back, I grew up watching a lot of Bruce Lee movies. And when I think about it, you know, I was the girl who was actually creating her own nunchucks, you know, in the backyard. And I think when I really stop and think about that, I mean, it just made me feel like there was nothing that I could not do, whether as a girl, you know, doing boy things. I would take apart my skateboard and stuff like that, so I was a tomboy. But when I think about the Bruce Lee movies, it just caused me not to think about myself as I was only a black girl, so to speak, even though coming through, you know, middle school and elementary school, I got teased a lot for being dark-skinned. So I think Bruce Lee movies, and then I was a big fan of Mahogany, because here was this, you know, Diana Ross character from Detroit and going overseas and traveling and that kind of thing, and I'd never experienced that growing up as a young girl. And then in high school, The Rose, starring Bette Midler, it just is a film that's always just stuck with me. I think just because it was so different than anything that I had ever seen and what I'd grown up with. So, you know, it just taught me to be myself, I guess.
I'm actually going to second Anne's comment about Triumph of the Will. It was completely horrifying and feeling, well, culture can do that. And in fact, about 2 months ago, I started reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which had been in my father's library for years. And what a history! What a time! And understanding how it happened and why it happened is really important. Really, really important.
For me, I was just thinking about this the other day. Network, seeing it in the mid-'70s and thinking to myself, okay, television will actually sell misery for ratings. It'll never happen. My first thought, it will never happen. But one of the things it did was it made me feel like someone should be talking about this, because and when I show it now, I actually teach it to undergrads. They cannot believe that we were having this conversation in 1974, 75, 76, actually, about the future of television, and the future is what's in their living rooms right now. So that film really helped me become sort of aware of the power of the media and conglomeration in a way that I had not been up until that time.
We should just play Ned Beatty's speech in that movie to sum up the panel.
That would be great. Thank you very much for spending some time with me.